All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're uh, going deep on something I think a lot of people are still trying to process.
Definitely. It's one of those things where everyone has an opinion, but maybe not everyone's really dug into the details.
Totally. And that's what we're here for, right? We're talking about, Trump's deportation
Yeah,
policies.
that whole era. I mean, the guy was president for what, 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
But the effects are still being felt, and it really gets to the heart of something fundamental, the whole security versus humanitarianism thing when we talk about immigration.
Yeah. Big picture stuff. But before we get too philosophical, let's set the scene. We're
Yeah.
talking about a period when over 5 million deportations took place. Just let that sink in for a second. 5 million people.
Yeah, it's a huge number, and I think it's easy to get lost in the statistics. But, each one of those deportations represents a life, a family, a whole story.
Absolutely. And that's why we're taking this deep dive, right? To understand not just the numbers, but the human side of these policies. What happened? How did they play out on the ground? And what kind of impact did they have?
Right, because you can read all the headlines you want, but
Okay.
it's the stories of those individuals and families that really tell the tale.
Totally. So where do we even begin? I guess we have to start with the policies themselves.
Yeah, I mean, from day one, the Trump campaign was really upfront about their intentions when it came to immigration enforcement. Build the wall, deport them all, that kind of rhetoric.
Right. Remember bad hombres?
Oh, yeah. That phrase kind of summed up their initial focus. It gave the impression they were going after the most dangerous criminals. But the thing is, what they actually ended up doing was way broader than that.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What was the deal with Executive Order 13768? What did that change?
Well, basically, it flipped the script. See, before that, deportations were mostly focused on people who posed a clear threat to public safety, violent criminals, repeat offenders.
Right, the worst of the worst.
Exactly. But with this executive order, it was like they threw out the playbook. Suddenly, any undocumented immigrant, no matter how minor their offense, even if they had no criminal record at all, could be a target for deportation.
Wow. So basically, if you were undocumented, you were in danger, period.
Pretty much. It didn't matter if you had been living here for years, if you had a family, a job, a whole life. That order just cast this huge net over everyone.
And that really set the stage for zero tolerance at the border.
Oh, yeah. Zero tolerance was like the poster child for this whole era. I mean, the name says it all, right? No exceptions.
So what exactly did that look like in practice?
Okay, so imagine you're crossing the border without authorization. Under zero tolerance, you're automatically facing criminal charges no matter what. But here's the catch. They can't detain children with their parents in adult criminal facilities.
So what happened to the kids?
That's the truly heartbreaking part. They got separated, boom, just like that. You're in jail, your kid's in some government facility.
It's hard to even fathom.
Over 5,500 children were separated from their families because of this policy. 5,500 kids. It's mind-boggling. And the impact of that trauma, it's going to last for generations, I'm telling you.
That's just, I don't even know what to say. And it wasn't just at the border either, right? Didn't ICE raids ramp up during this time too?
Oh, absolutely. Workplace raids became a huge thing. Now, these weren't entirely new, but under Trump, they were happening way more often and on a much bigger scale.
So who were they targeting?
They mostly went after industries with a lot of undocumented workers, agriculture, construction, places like that.
And the thing is, those raids weren't just disrupting businesses. They were tearing apart whole communities.
Oh, totally. Imagine, you're living your life, going to work, raising your family, and then bam, ICE agents storm your workplace. People are getting handcuffed, detained, the whole 9 yards. It just created this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty everywhere.
To really understand how this shift felt on the ground, we should probably hear from someone who was dealing with it firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a hypothetical clip here from Carlos Garcia, an immigration attorney. He really paints a picture of how things changed.
Okay, let's hear it. Hypothetical audio clip, Carlos Garcia. Look, before Trump, we knew ICE was out there, but they were mainly going after the real bad guys, the violent offenders. But then all of a sudden, it was like anyone could be a target. I'm talking about people who've lived here for years, working, paying taxes, raising families, a broken taillight. Boom, you're on their radar. It was like the message was, if you're undocumented, you're not welcome, period. and the courts are still dealing with the mess this created.
That's powerful, isn't it? He really gets across that feeling of, like, no one is safe.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the policies themselves, it was the whole rhetoric surrounding them.
Oh, for sure. The way they talked about immigrants, calling them animals, invaders, that kind of thing, it was dehumanizing. It made it easier to justify these harsh policies.
And that's a crucial point, right? The language we use shapes how we think about issues, and it can have a real impact on how we treat each other.
Absolutely. Words matter. And when you're talking about vulnerable populations like immigrants, it's even more important to be mindful of the language being used.
It's interesting, though, because even with all this talk about deportations, the actual numbers under Trump were lower than they were at the peak of the Obama administration. How do we square that circle?
That's a good question. And it shows that there's more to this story than just the total number of deportations. What really shifted under Trump was who they were targeting and how they were doing it. Remember, it went from focusing on serious criminals to going after pretty much anyone undocumented. And then you add in the tactics like family separation. It just created this whole different atmosphere. It was about sending a message, making people afraid.
Yeah, creating a chilling effect.
Exactly. So even if the raw numbers were lower, the impact was arguably much wider and more profound.
Okay, so we've talked about the policies, the rhetoric, the numbers, but I think it's time we really zero in on the human side of this. These weren't just abstract policy decisions. They had real consequences for real people.
Absolutely. And that's what often gets lost in all the political back and forth. We need to hear the stories, the voices of the people who were directly affected by these policies.
Exactly. So let's talk about Maria Gonzalez. She's a mother from Guatemala who crossed the Rio Grande in 2019. Her story, I think, really captures the trauma of this period.
Yeah, Maria's story is it's heartbreaking. I mean, she risked everything to come to the U.S., cross the river, the whole thing, and then she gets caught, and they separate her from her 6-year-old son. Can you imagine?
It's just unimaginable. And she spent 72 days in detention, not knowing what had happened to her son.
And she kept a diary during that time, just to hold on to some sense of hope, I guess. And we have an excerpt from it here, translated, of course. It's really powerful stuff.
Let's hear it. Hypothetical audio diary, Maria Gonzalez translated. Every night, I just whisper prayers. I wanted to hear his voice, even if it was just in my head. The guards, they'd say these awful things, like, your son's going to forget about you. He's going to think you abandoned him. And then when we finally saw each other again, after what felt like forever, he just wouldn't let go of me. He was just clinging to my leg, sobbing. And even now, months later, the fear, it's always there, like a thickness. Just that fear of a knock on the door, the fear of going outside, it never really goes away.
You can just feel the pain in her words, can't you?
Absolutely. The lasting trauma, the fear, it's devastating.
And this is the kind of human cost that often gets overlooked in these debates. The impact on children, on families, it's just immeasurable.
And, when faced with all this outcry over family separation, the Trump administration, they had their justifications, of course. We actually have a clip of Trump himself addressing this issue.
All right, let's hear what he had to say.
Hypothetical archival clip, Donald Trump. Look, it's very simple. If you don't want to be separated from your child, don't come here illegally.
Yeah.
Come the right way. There are legal ways to enter our country. That's how it should be done.
So their argument was basically, hey, this is a deterrent. If you don't want your family to be ripped apart, don't break the law. Simple as that.
Right, but that kind of ignores the reality of why people are coming here in the first place. Fleeing violence, seeking asylum. It's not always a simple choice.
Exactly. And seeking asylum is a legal right, by the way. It's not like everyone's just sneaking across the border for fun.
Right, there are international laws, treaties. This isn't just some random rule that someone made up.
Totally. And the thing is, that argument, it kind of dehumanizes people. It reduces them to just lawbreakers, and it ignores all the complex factors that drive migration in the first place.
Yeah, it simplifies a really complicated issue.
It does. And, it's not just the immigrants who were affected by these policies. The people enforcing them, they were struggling too.
That's an important point. It's easy to forget that there are real people on both sides of this equation.
Right. And we actually have a hypothetical account here from a former ICE agent who ended up resigning because of what they were being asked to do.
Really? Wow. Okay. Let's hear it. Anonymous ex-ICE agent.
Yeah.
I went into ICE because I wanted to make a difference. I thought I'd be going after dangerous criminals, drug traffickers, that kind of thing. But then things changed. They started sending us after anyone who was undocumented. I remember one raid, we hit this bakery at like 5 a.m. There was this mother there making tortillas. Her kids were asleep upstairs. And we handcuffed her right there in front of her kids.
Oh.
It was just wrong. I couldn't sleep at night after that. I knew I had to get out.
That's so powerful. I mean, this is someone who signed up to uphold the law, and they ended up feeling like they were doing something deeply immoral.
And it really highlights the disconnect between the stated goals of these policies, keeping us safe, and the reality on the ground.
Yeah, the human cost. It's not just statistics, it's real people, real families being torn apart.
Okay, so this all leads us to the big question, right? The debate at the heart of all this. Was it about security or was it about cruelty?
This is where it gets really complicated, right? Because there are valid arguments on both sides. And it often comes down to your core beliefs about immigration, about national identity, about what it means to be American.
So let's try to unpack those arguments. Let's start with the pro-Trump perspective. What were the main points they were making?
Okay, so their argument went something like this. Every country has the right to control its borders, right? And open borders are just not sustainable. They lead to security risks, they strain social services, the whole thing.
Right, and they'd say that sanctuary cities were basically undermining federal law.
Exactly. And their whole thing was, hey, we need to enforce the laws we have, and that includes deporting people who are here illegally. They saw Trump as someone who was finally taking a stand, putting America first.
Okay, so that's one side. Now, what about the immigrant rights advocates? What were they saying?
Well, they were basically saying, look, separating families is torture, plain and simple. It's inhumane. It causes lasting trauma, and it's just plain wrong.
And they'd point out that the vast majority of people being deported weren't criminals. They were just folks who were trying to build a life here.
Exactly. They'd say, these people are working, paying taxes, raising families. They're part of our communities. And to just rip them away, it's not only cruel, it's counterproductive.
And they also accused the Trump administration of using fear and xenophobia to push their agenda.
Oh, absolutely. They'd say that Trump was deliberately demonizing immigrants for political gain.
It's interesting because the data does seem to support that view. I mean, 74% of the people deported under Trump had no criminal record.
That's right. And that really challenges the narrative that this was all about getting rid of dangerous criminals.
But here's the thing. Even with all that, polls showed that around 35% of Americans supported these tactics.
Yeah, and that's the real head scratcher, isn't it? How can there be such a huge divide in public opinion on something like this?
I think it really speaks to how deeply ingrained these beliefs are. It's about your worldview, your values. It goes way beyond just the policies themselves.
Totally. And it shows how polarized we've become as a society.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about the legacy of these policies, because even though Trump's out of office, the effects are still being felt.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You can change policies, but the impact on people's lives, that stuff lingers.
And one of the most tragic aspects of this whole thing is the fact that there are still over 1,000 children who are separated from their families at the border who haven't been reunited.
It's just mind-blowing that this is still going on. And the trauma that these kids have experienced, it's going to have lifelong consequences.
And therapists are saying that many of these kids are showing signs of PTSD, anxiety, attachment disorders.
Yeah, I mean, imagine being ripped away from your parents at that age. It's unfathomable.
And the thing is, the effects aren't limited to those directly affected. The policies and the rhetoric of the Trump era have had a ripple effect, influencing immigration laws at the state level.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're seeing states like Texas and Florida passing laws that basically criminalize helping undocumented immigrants. It's like Trump's blueprint is still being used.
And this is where we need to bring in Dr. Amira Patel, a sociologist at Stanford. She has this really insightful take on the lasting impact of all this.
Okay, let's hear it.
Hypothetical quote, Dr. Amira Patel. The real legacy of Trump's immigration policies, it's not just the laws themselves. It's the way they've changed how we think about immigrants. It's like they've normalized the idea that migrants are threats, not people. And that's a cultural shift that's going to be much harder to undo than any executive order.
Man, that's deep. It's like she's saying that we've lost our humanity somewhere along the way.
Yeah, and that's a really scary thought.
It is, because once you start dehumanizing a group of people, it becomes much easier to justify treating them badly.
Okay, so looking ahead, what does all this mean for the future, especially with Trump potentially running again in 2024?
Well, let's just say it's not looking good. I mean, he's already talking about even harsher measures, mass detention camps, ending birthright citizenship, sending the military to the border.
It's like he's doubling down on everything.
He is. And, the Supreme Court is more conservative now than it was during his first term, so there's a real possibility that he could get away with even more this time around.
And to really understand the legal implications of all this, we need to hear from legal scholar Linda Harper.
All right, let's see what she has to say.
Hypothetical warning, Linda Harper. We've already seen the Supreme Court uphold some pretty controversial immigration policies, like remain in Mexico. And with the current makeup of the court, there's a real danger that even more extreme measures could be coming. If Trump gets back in, we could see a deportation wave unlike anything we've ever seen before, and the legal landscape could be permanently altered.
Wow, that's a sobering thought. It's like we're on the edge of a precipice.
It feels that way, doesn't it? So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the one thing that's clear is that the human cost of these policies was immense. And the question we're left with is, was it worth it? Was national security really enhanced, or did we just sacrifice our values for nothing?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that each of us has to answer for ourselves. But one thing's for sure, the scars of this era are going to be with us for a long time.
And as we head into another election cycle, it's more important than ever to think about what kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a fortress, or do we want to be a sanctuary?
Those are the stakes. And it's up to each of us to decide what kind of future we want to build.
And on that note, we're going to leave you to ponder that. But be sure to join us next time on The Deep Dive, when we'll be exploring the economic forces behind all this, the whole border industrial complex. It's a fascinating and, frankly, kind of disturbing story. So until then, thanks for diving in with us.